Okay, I'm going to just start with introductions, and folks who come on, we'll just keep making sure to welcome people. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amber Coté. I am the Senior Director of Statewide Civic Engagement for Rocky Mountain Public Media, and I am so happy to have you all here with us this evening. Thanks for being with us. When we first designed this convening, we called it Understanding the Debate, Media Bias, Public Trust, and the Role of Public Broadcasting. The idea was to open up space for conversation in a polarized moment, to explore how public broadcasting is viewed, where trust has eroded, and how it might still serve as a source of strength for democracy and civic life. Since then, we asked you what questions you wanted answered, and your responses added urgency and clarity. Many of you told us you wanted to understand the history of public funding and what happens now that federal support has been rescinded, the distinctions between public, nonprofit, and commercial, and where public broadcasting fits in today. The role of national versus local public media, with concerns about bias often focused nationally, but those impacts most deeply felt locally. And most of all, how public media can endure without federal funding and what you can do to help. Over 90% of you strongly disagreed with the decision to eliminate funding. You see it as a threat to democracy and free press, with words like censorship coming up again and again. A smaller group raised a different concern, that government funding itself creates dependency and undercuts independence. And both perspectives are real, and both are part of this debate. So today, with the help of our panel, Martín Carcasson, Joanna Kail, CEO of Wyoming PBS, and Amanda Mountain, President and CEO of Rocky Mountain Public Media, we're going to provide historical context and funding basics, both national, state, and local, explore the impacts on local stations and communities in Colorado and Wyoming, open a discussion on bias, accountability, and public expectations, and begin to outline possible paths forward without federal support. This will be an interactive session with polls, Q&A, and moments to reflect, because our goal is not just to explain what's happening, but to listen, to clarify, and to co-create a path forward with you. From there, I'll let you take it over, Martín.
Thank you very much, Amber. Thanks for having me. So my name is Martín Carcasson. I'm a communication studies professor at Colorado State University. Been here 20 years. And 18 years ago, I started an organization called the Center for Public Deliberation, or the CPD, which serves as an impartial resource for the Northern Colorado community. I do a lot of work on the community, serving as an impartial resource, focused on helping people have the tough conversations that we need to have for democracy to work. So I'll be helping out tonight. I've been working a little bit with Rocky Mountain Public Media for the last couple of years in their Above the Noise project to help build capacity across the state through local newsrooms to again, help us engage better. A lot of my work is tied to social psychology and brain science. Our brains, unfortunately, are not wired for the kind of conversations we need to have. We're more naturally wired for outrage and polarization than we are sometimes for the collaboration and deliberation that the problems that we face together kind of most need. So what I've been doing the last few weeks to kind of prepare for this is what I often do with issues is to try to make sense of the noise out there. Lots of different perspectives, lots of arguments, dug into quite a few different articles. But then, as you all RSVP'd, we asked you a couple questions. We asked, hey, what questions do you have? Which really helped us kind of form our agenda tonight. But then we also asked you, do you agree or disagree with the decision to rescind the funding? And then why? What are the arguments? And that's really my academic background is in argumentation. Like, how do people make arguments and how to dig into the reasons people give and help people across perspectives understand each other's reasons. So that's kind of how we designed tonight. A little later on, when we really get into the debate and the different sides of this, to react to that in some important ways, right? So I'm going to share my screen here just to pull up. We're not going to use PowerPoint too much tonight. We just got a few slides just to kind of situate things. And Alex, I don't know if they're seeing my slide. Do you need to switch something over? Okay, there we go. Now, oh, no. I don't think the public's seeing it. I'm logged in as y'all in my I know we got
Try
popping
it
up.
again, Martín.
Huh?
Go ahead and try it again.
Like stop sharing and start sharing. Yeah, there it goes. We're learning the webinar function a little bit. So yeah, this is kind of the overview of today that we'll kind of take on. Pretty ambitious schedule, so we'll try to kind of take questions as we go. Hopefully have some good time at the end for some additional questions. Amber will be looking at those questions as they're kind of coming in. But this is also kind of the first session of, hopefully we'll have a few of these. So a lot of what we'll be taking in tonight will also help inform future conversations. I'll be spending some time developing some materials that I do in my work to help us have better conversations about tough issues. That'll be focused on public media. So you'll see some new information that we're asking you to react to today. We want to ask your help to kind of refine it. So we're going to start off here in a second with just some basic information. A lot of confusion. The American system of how public media was funded was pretty complex compared to most public media in other countries. So we'll kind of give some information. We got a short little video that we'll share with that, and then we'll let Joanna and Amanda kind of talk through the impacts that's making and answer some of the questions that came up. Then we'll spend a little time on specifically what Rocky Mountain Public Media and Wyoming PBS does. And then we'll get into what I've been really working on is really looking at what are the arguments made to support public media and what are some of the critiques. And we'll kind of explore those. And since most of the people that RSVP'd, based on your answers, were highly supportive of public media, which makes sense, you mainly got notice of this event through PBS, and only had a few that were critiques. We'll summarize what we heard on making the case from public media. We might not spend as much time on that. We want to spend more time on the critiques to think about, how do we respond to those, which those seem more legitimate and which, might ask us to kind of change what we're doing in some ways. And then we'll end out with a path forward. What are these two organizations kind of doing now? What's their plans with the kind of new reality of the funding situation? And we'll also be asking you to kind of what you're doing, right? What are you willing to do to kind of address this situation? And then get into Q&A. And then we're already set up for our next session. We did hear a lot on the survey from people of like, how do you rebuild trust? We're not going to focus on that much tonight because that is the focus of our next session here in a few weeks, right? But before we get into the first topic, we do have some interactive polling, which is embedded in Zoom, so you shouldn't have to go anywhere. But Alex, if you want to go and pop up those first two questions, what we want to do here is just get a sense of who's in the room, right? We have a sense of who RSVP'd. But of the ones that came here, and we just want to be transparent about this, right? The audience that's here is, generally going to be pretty highly supportive of PBS, so we want to recognize that. So you'll see those results are kind of coming in. So we'll give you just a few seconds. There are two questions there. You kind of answer both at the same time. And again, with the second question, agreeing with the decision is you're agreeing with the rescission with the cut of funds. Disagreeing with it is you wanted public media to maintain or retain that funding. And as expected from the RCPs, you see right now we're strongly in favor of the decision, or of keeping the funding. Right, so we've got a good sense of that there. Going to the top one, looking at it, we got a nice split here. So from urban Colorado, about half of y'all, a little bit over half. We got 13% from rural Colorado, and then we have about 28% from Wyoming, with that split being mostly. Well, I guess it's an overall. 27% from rural and 7% from urban. And then a few people there, I'm assuming the other are from out of state, but interested in the topic as we go through, right? So I think we can go ahead and end that poll. And I'll turn it over. I don't know, Amanda and Joanna, if you just want to introduce yourselves real quickly, and then we'll jump into that first bullet point of the history and show the video here in a second.
Thank you, Martín. I'm Joanna Kail, with the CEO of Wyoming PBS, and I just want to say thank you to Martín as well as the team at Rocky Mountain PBS. This was a conversation that started and became this webinar for us to be able to have this conversation even more broadly. So the power and the might behind all of this and the technical side is Rocky Mountain PBS. So thank you. Thank you for your partnership and your trust in doing this. The idea to do this together, Amanda and I, as leadership of two independent television stations and public media, feel that now is the best time to have this conversation with what's going on across the country. So with that, I also will let everyone know I've been the CEO of Wyoming PBS for about 2 years now. Prior to that, I was at the foundation, executive director of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. So go ahead, Amanda.
Hi, thanks so much, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And Martín, thank you so much for all the time and effort and for all of your partnership and for all of you taking time out of your evening to spend with us. We really appreciate your support. I'm Amanda Mountain. I'm the president and CEO of Rocky Mountain Public Media, which includes Rocky Mountain PBS, Kuvo Jazz, and The Drop, which are 2 public radio stations. And together we serve the entirety of Colorado and beyond. We are the largest membership organization in the state with over 107,000 members in every county of Colorado. And I was really drawn to this conversation because as we were all living through the headlines together, it just felt like, and like it so often does, we're missing the most important conversations that we sometimes want to have and that we lose in the headlines. And so I'm really grateful to have this chance with all of you to really dig in and listen to what you have to share with us and to respond and let you know that your feedback really matters and we do something with that. So thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and set up the video. I don't know if you want to explain this briefly, Amanda. This is the big picture, how public media was funded, right? This video was done, I think, in April or so, a few months before.
Yeah, it can be complicated, as Martín has said. So our friends at GBH in Boston, who produce some of our most beloved PBS programs that you know and love, like Masterpiece and Nova and Nature and others, they created this video to help just explain how public funding works in a simpler way. And then we can share a bit about how it impacts Colorado and Wyoming right after we watch the video.
Ever wonder how shows like Arthur or Antiques Roadshow get made? Well, you have to go back to the 1960s when the FCC chairman proclaimed television to be a vast wasteland. In response, Congress created a place where the American people could access quality educational programs. Think of it like the national parks. They wanted to create a space where any American, no matter their means,
pause to learn, grow, and admire the splendor of our world.
Hold on, is that not showing again?
So, in 1967, a bipartisan...
Last time I stopped sharing and then started sharing again. Where's my stop sharing screen?
While Martín is bringing that up, maybe we can just proactively share a bit how federal funding works in Colorado and Wyoming, because it's different in each state. We don't receive any state funding here in Colorado, and we receive a little over $3.2 million a year in federal investment that we really view as a public-private partnership. And Joe, I know it works differently in Wyoming.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. In Wyoming, we have 3 different funding mechanisms primarily, but the CPB funding that was coming to the station represented about 30% of our overall revenue every year, and it was about $1.4 million. It fluctuated year to year, and the state of Wyoming is a significant contributor to Wyoming PBS at about 40% of our budget, and they provide us with about $1.6 million a year. And then the final third approximately comes in through our support from our viewers and membership, as well as other means that we have with private public partnerships as well, lease tower leases and those sorts of things, foundations, private donations. So that's how our current financial makeup works.
It does look like the video is up now. So I will restart that.
Ever wonder how shows like Arthur or Antiques Roadshow get made? Well, you have to go back to the 1960s when the FCC chairman proclaimed television to be a vast wasteland. In response, Congress created a place where the American people could access quality educational programs. Think of it like the national parks. They wanted to create a space where any American, no matter their means or status, could pause to learn, grow, and admire the splendor of our world. So, in 1967, a bipartisan group of lawmakers created the Public Broadcasting Act, and with it, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or CPB for short. The CPB was developed as a public corporation, not a government agency, in order to insulate it from the winds of political change. But how does the whole system work? Well, it all starts and ends with you. Your taxes fund the CPB, about $1.60 per person per year. That's less than a cup of coffee and certainly less than a carton of eggs. The CPB takes your $1.60 and allocates it across America to your local stations. Stations use this money to pay dues to PBS so they can air programs like Arthur and Antiques Roadshow. It's kind of like being in one big broadcasting club. But who creates the programs? Well, PBS gives some of the funds to larger stations like GBH who create shows with part of your $1.60, but also with funds from other foundations, sponsors, and of course, viewers like you. All stations are interdependent. The CPB funding is the glue that binds the public media system together. Remember when you traveled the world with Carmen Sandiego, learned to love books with Reading Rainbow, or measured twice and cut once on This Old House? Maybe you still remember a fun science fact from a Nova documentary, or you had a recent revelation when you watched Frontline. All of these programs exist so that you can explore and understand the larger world. Whether it's reporting on ferry delays in Washington State, farming in the Midwest, or fishing season on the East Coast, America is full of different, wonderful places where each local station adapts to the specific needs of their communities. So what makes public media special? Well, it's made by and for you. But without the CPB funding, the system is at risk. Smaller member stations will close, news deserts will get worse, and producing stations like GBH might be unable to make your favorite shows. If you want to keep the public media system working and love our programs, you can support us by calling your local representatives or donating to your local public media station like GBH.
All right, so I'll turn it over to y'all. If there's other things that you want to clarify with that. You gave some numbers there a minute ago, right? There's a lot of questions of how big of the budget for individual kind of media organizations is this money coming from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting? So, yeah, go ahead and go, Amanda.
Yeah, so when you saw the headlines about the rescission to public media funding, what that did was claw back 2 years of previously approved funding by Congress. We are one of the only budget approvals that was in advance, and that was by design to protect us, as that video shared, from political headwinds. When those 2 years of funding was clawed back, it's important, I think, to look at that total amount of $535 million a year and know that $350 million of that go directly to local stations. So when Joe and I shared how much our respective organizations receive from that public-private investment, that is where the majority of the money is going, is to local stations across the country. But in addition to having what is called community service grants that CPB is awarding local stations taken away, we also have an expected increase in our expenses. And that comes from the remaining dollars that really go to help pool and purchase things at a discount, whether that's additional content and investing in things that we couldn't afford to do alone, or it's in the infrastructure and technology required to share content back and forth across the country. This is also how those federal dollars is put to use to keep our expenses low and to really maximize every donor dollar to its highest impact.
Yeah, Joanna, and then Amber, I don't know if there's any questions coming up about the video or any kind of specific knowledge stuff that we might want to look at. Yeah.
No,
Joanna.
I think Amanda said that very well. That's exactly how the makeup works. And it's interesting because one of the things that we've talked about in the past is the funding mechanism can also be a little bit different. And I think GBH did a great job of explaining the production side, the content side of what PBS provides, which is solely content. I mean, they are solely a content distributor. And we are members of PBS. And we get a lot of our content through PBS as well as other organizations as well. But they're our primary content provider for public television stations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know, Joanna, you do get some state funding from the state of Wyoming, right? But Amanda, Colorado does not provide funding to you, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Colorado's a bit different. We actually have almost 20 public media organizations serving different corners of our state. In part, that's because of the topography. It's a complicated state for us to access every community, but an organization like Rocky Mountain PBS does serve the entire state. through free over-the-air broadcast. And we've got locations in Fruita and Colorado Springs and Denver and reporters across the state. So we think of creative ways to both partner with public media organizations to create an ecosystem that stays strong. But the biggest threat is, as Joanna mentioned, to rural communities that need to rely on a higher percentage of their annual funds coming through a public-private partnership because there isn't a large enough base of philanthropic support to fill the gap. And that's why you saw so much coverage about how rural communities are going to be hurt the most from this federal funding rescission.
That's right, Amanda, and I think it's important too. We are in a very low populated state in Wyoming. We only have almost 600,000 people in the state of Wyoming, and we are a statewide network. We also will partner with Wyoming Public Radio, Wyoming Public Media, as much as we can on projects, and we have a great relationship with them as well. But we are just public television. We are not a joint license. We don't have both radio and television. So we also, with our responsibility of having emergency alerts, go to the people of Wyoming across the state. We have 50 towers across the state of Wyoming that we have to maintain and manage to make sure that all the emergency alerts reach the people of Wyoming. So of course, that is a rather large expense. And with just 600,000 people in the state of Wyoming, we have an incredible membership base. We have really dedicated members and supporters. But of course, a lot of those towers come with great expense, and the state understands and has understood for a very long time how important it is to maintain that, as well as preserve and tell Wyoming stories and provide good public affairs programming that's trusted and transparent. So it is every station is unique, and as Amanda was saying, we are a university licensee. We're housed at a community college in Central Wyoming. We're so very fortunate and humbled to be with Central Wyoming College, but every station's different in their own unique ways. So.
Yeah,
I do. I know we got some questions and there's some confusion there of, we're using the label public media for y'all, right? You're getting some funding, but the way it was designed was not direct funding, right? Used to go to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, which is a nonprofit, and then it would be, to kind of have some separation from the government. So this is not state media, right? This is not government media. This is the government providing some funding for public media. And we'll get into a lot of the arguments about public media in a second. But the idea is we have commercial media and we have public media, right? And then now we're getting more and more nonprofit media, which is not for profit. It's kind of mission driven in a sense, right? So we have a very complicated and a very busy kind of media landscape, and that's the question of how does public media fit into this broader landscape, right? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or I was just trying to respond to some of those questions.
Yeah, and I think no matter where we sit in terms of our tax status, but to make it clear, public media is nonprofit media, and our tax status is 501c3 nonprofit. I think generally speaking, we are hearing from communities that they need to have more trust in their sources of information. And in order for public media to continue to evolve, we need to really lean into conversations with our communities and to continually reflect in our programming, whether that's through in-person events or what you're hearing or seeing on the radio or television. We are reflecting back at you what your experiences are as you go about your everyday lives. And we're addressing what is most important to you in ways that are really meaningful, that help you tangibly live better lives. And our mission is to strengthen the civic fabric of Colorado. And we do think media can and should be a really important part of that. And it's harder to do that than it ever has been before, not just because of the federal rescission, but also because we're operating in a low trust environment where people are feeling isolated and alienated from each other. And so public media also has a role to play there, where we can really bring ourselves back into community, introduce you to your neighbors, and humanize issues that so often get boiled down into sound bites that are going to get the most click-throughs by commercial media outlets that are increasingly consolidated and broadcast from just a few places in the country.
Agreed. I'm just adding on to what Amanda has said because I agree with everything she's saying. Also, I think the digital world has put us in a situation where we aren't having those one-on-one, those interpersonal, those events where we talk to each other as community members. I think we hear so much from a national level that maybe isn't necessarily as relevant to what we really need to hear to keep the fabric of our communities together, as Amanda was saying, that glue that binds us together. I really feel like public media has a unique opportunity to really pull everyone together into this opportunity for communities to get to know each other again and get to know what's important in our state and around our, friends and family. We're at that level. We're at that micro level. That's where public media is. And that's where we are unique to other public media systems throughout the world. The fact that we are independent stations answering to the communities and answering to those audience members within our communities is what truly makes us unique. We answer to the people. And so that is where we are different, and that is where we are vital and where we're very important. We're preserving history, arts, and culture. We're also providing public affairs that you're not necessarily seeing on the national scale. It's now harder than ever to get eyeballs on content, as I'm sure Amanda would agree. There's so much content out there, but the important content in a lot of situations when it comes to our local communities, that's what really brings us all together as the fabric of our communities and our society. It's that local content, trusted content. You can go and you can give Amanda a call. You can call Joanna, Kail at Wyoming PBS. You can have those conversations with us. And we're the CEOs of television networks that answer to the people. And that's an important factor.
So we'll need to move on here in a second, but I do want to make one clarification, and y'all can add to this if you want. So the two of y'all, Wyoming PBS is the television that we're getting the funding, and Rocky Mountain Public Media does the PBS. You also have two radio stations, but then the states also we have Colorado Public Media, Colorado Public Radio and Wyoming Public Radio, and there's probably a few other independent stations that might get funding, right? So there's lots of public media in the state. Y'all are representative of at least the PBS side of both of those, right? I don't know if there's any other clarifications, but just to make sure our audience know, it's beyond y'all, right? All right, so we're going to shift now to start kind of digging into the arguments. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully, okay. I'm looking at my phone now so I can see. So now we're going to get into understanding the debate, which is again my world in a sense of trying to be the impartial resource to understand the arguments and clarify them and bring people together. I create a lot of my work. I create these discussion guides of trying to summarize what we're hearing and put it in a way that's easy to kind of dig into. So that's what we're going to do now. We have two lists of arguments about public media. So the first list that we're going to dig into a little bit is making the case for public media. What are the reasons? A lot of this was from the survey. When we asked people, were you for or against the decision and why? We heard a lot of why your defense of PBS, your defense of public media, and why was it important to you? So I try to capture all those, but I also have spent the last 3 weeks reading a lot about the history, the initial development, the LBJ's speech, and a lot of the original documents of creating public media in the first place. And then when we get into the critiques, the same thing. We didn't get many critiques from the survey because, again, most of y'all are supportive. So I spent some time making sure digging into arguments that were made against this to present those to you for us to kind of engage them. This is a beginning of a process. We'll go ahead and pull up that second round of questions. The questions are going to match this. I'm going to kind of briefly touch on these. Hopefully these kind of make sense on their own, but it's something to react to. And we'll have an open-ended question after. We're going to ask you which of these are most important to you to kind of get a sense of the room and kind of direct our conversation a little bit. But you'll also have a chance in an open-ended question after that I guess it's not actually showing my full slide. There we go. To add to this or respond to this or do comments. So this is not something final. We didn't get it right. But we want to kind of get a sense of the richness of the different arguments that we're hearing. And you can also think about these in a couple ways. Part of this is theoretically, this is why we want public media. A lot of these things initially, public media, the market was not providing these things, particularly to certain smaller communities. So that was the case for a public media, for the government to step in to provide these things that were needed that the market wasn't provided. And that tension between does the government provide or the market provide is certainly one of the big kind of tensions in our political world, right? So did you get the poll up? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So we got the poll up now. You have that same list that you have on their screen, and we're just asking you to pick 3 of those. What's most important to you that you want to hear us talk about? This will also be good information for us kind of moving forward to dig into these. And then you'll see after that you have an open-ended. It's going to be hard for us to make sense of the open-ended questions if we're getting them from 140 people, but that's going to be great information for us after the fact, right? And Amanda and Joanna, I'll kind of turn it over to you. I can also talk about some of these because, again, this is just a quick summary of lots of information I've been going over for the last few days. Looking at the poll, we're already seeing a trusted source of news and information that's freely available to all as kind of the top one right now.
So while the results are rolling in, I can just share a little bit about how we do our work at Rocky Mountain Public Media, specifically to be alongside communities, understanding and listening to you share with us what's most important, and then reflecting those conversations back into content. And so this is a good example. This is above the noise. This is an ongoing way that Rocky Mountain Public Media addresses what is typically kind of consolidated into partisan arguments. That's typically what political coverage is. It's what you're used to seeing and reading and doom scrolling just probably as much as I am. We are hearing from people, and have been for a long time, that these arguments just don't feel productive. These arguments, as they're generally framed between Republicans and Democrats, don't feel they feel more divisive. They're not bringing people together. In fact, they're dividing people even around their own dinner tables. And that folks were struggling for a path back into their families, their communities, and that they wanted to be, they just wanted to, they did not want politics to be this big divide that was hurting themselves and their families and communities. And so that's where our team stepped in and created a series of conversations like tonight, where we said, you know what, we're going to step into the complexities and nuances of a conversation that we feel hasn't fully been had yet, and we need to have. You deserve us to delve into this, even if you're already supportive. You deserve to understand, how are we answering our critics right now when the volume is pretty high on these accusations against public media and bias. And so that's how we apply our philosophy of community-centered design to above the noise, but really to all that we aim to do.
And one of the things I would actually, before when we were prepping to go live with everyone, I was talking to Amanda and Martín about how we really hope, and I was going to close with this, but this is my first time doing this, so I'm going to mix it up a little bit. What's happening right now in terms of these conversations with bias is so important for Wyoming, and I would really love and will hope to bring this similar dynamic to the state of Wyoming. I've had conversations with Martín, and he has worked with the University of Wyoming to also have these similar conversations, and I think we can bring this on a broader scale, because I think exactly what Amanda was saying is that we can't think of a better time now than ever, and maybe we should have been doing this before. But, we can think about what we should have done, but we can do what we need to do right now, which is have the conversation. There's a lot of opinions out there. I've been talking with a lot of folks about how the system works. And that's one of the most difficult things when it comes to questions of bias. One of the very common questions that I'll get is, well, you're PBS, so you are a PBS network station, basically. And that's actually not technically how this works. So we are a public television station, but we are an independent public television station. We are independent of Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and we are also independent of PBS. So I think that also is a part that can get confusing. We try our very, very hardest to make sure that we're representing the people of Wyoming. As Martín will go into more about what bias really means. We do our best to represent the people of Wyoming, but that's our focus. Wyoming PBS's focus is the audience of Wyoming. And so we're always looking out into other opportunities to learn, like Amanda was talking about, like this program Above the Noise. And these are kinds of opportunities. This is why it's a unique system, because we can learn from each other and we can participate in these kinds of opportunities together. So stay tuned, Wyoming. I think this is exactly the kind of content that we need to be providing for Wyoming audience members.
I will say, if you're looking at the poll results, it's how many people that answered any question answered that one, right? So the percentages aren't like, split. It's not going to add up to 100%. It's much more. But yeah, so 70% of the people picked a trusted source of news and information is freely available to all and we're going to get into that a lot, right? Because one of the primary criticisms is it shouldn't be trusted, right? And we certainly saw from the survey results for people coming in that a lot of them saw PBS and public media as trusted, as objective, as fact-based. So that's a factual kind of conflict that we'll dig into some, right? Amber, did you have something you want to throw in?
I just think as part of the questions that are coming in, and this is part of the, I think, other questions that we got in our initial registration, is the fragmentation of the public media system helpful, or would it be better to find efficiency to improve the system? What would be lost and how could we avoid that?
Very, very good question. And there's a lot that can go into answering it. I will say yes to all of it. There is a very real benefit to the fragmentation of public media. And if it works to its highest potential, we are able together to deeply embed ourselves in communities across the country and truly develop and share content that helps us understand each other across geographic divides, educational divides, socioeconomic divides, and political divides. And that is critical, especially as we see the rise of technology and the algorithms niching us down into smaller and smaller boxes that we then become constrained by. And we are then just in a very tight ecosystem where we're only getting what it thinks we want. And we're only getting the information that it already knows we will either react to through anger or respond to out of support. And we don't want to live like that. I mean, public media audiences really value nuance and complexity and want to be introduced to perspectives that are different from our own, not in an effort to persuade or change our minds, but rather to recognize that we have open minds and we are growing and learning about each other. And we're building community together every day. And so it's really, really important to protect the independence and to respect the ability of sharing the information in a way that can help all of our understanding of America get richer and deeper. Where I feel like we have fallen short is executing against that potential. It is very challenging with all of our different governance structures, even, with those of us on this call. We're a 501c3 independent community licensee with a board of directors. Joanna's licensed to an educational institution receiving state funding. We have different governance structures that can make it difficult to act and execute swiftly, even on really good ideas. And so we do need to find different and better ways to work together. And we have to reframe these checks and balances as assets and not liabilities, because if we are able to do that, even national content that you receive is going to increasingly be richer and deeper and reflective of so much of America that just doesn't feel seen and heard by most of what you're seeing on cable news and even national news for sure.
I would agree. I think the fragmentation is an interesting word. I think for us, it's an independence that provides representation of our community. We just received a few more Emmys for a mental health series that we're working on. And that series has been incredibly impactful for the state of Wyoming because we have the highest suicide rate in the nation. I don't know if we were focused solely on this more national narrative if that local concern, that unique concern that is incredibly important to the state of Wyoming, would have been a capability of Wyoming PBS is to focus on a micro level. And I think that is why it is so important for us to remain independent stations answering to the people of our communities, because rural, again, and I'll just mention, we're 600,000 people in the state of Wyoming. We have a very unique culture. We have a very unique audience, but I don't necessarily think if it's always representative of the more urban areas in the country. And I think we provide that content, which does get shared on PBS and on other stations across the country. Our films, our documentaries that we do talking about the people of Wyoming do get shared on occasion nationwide and sometimes worldwide. That is important for our people to be able to share who we are and what we stand for. And so as you see the pockets, and GBH didn't have obviously all the stations, but you see all those stations across, those are stories. That's history and arts and culture from all of those towers and even more. There's close to 350 stations across the country. Those stories are rich, they're important, and without those individual stations, we might lose that level of customization as to who we are as community members, and that's important for America. We need to be sharing those stories.
I do want to move to the critiques pretty soon, right? Because again, for this audience, we want to kind of engage that. But I don't know, looking at the other list, if there's something else that you want, one of those other things that you want to kind of mention briefly of what you're trying to do or why that's important to you. You inherently kind of talked about the top two, because the second one was to counteract the loss of local journalism. And I agree, very much the research on my end of looking at polarization and looking at trying to bring people together. When news is national, it's inherently very divisive, right? It's a zero-sum, two-party, red versus blue. Whereas when the news is local, it's actually tapping into a very different identity, right? It's a tapping to a unity of bringing us together in a sense, right? So that loss of local journalism, not only does the research show that there's a loss of accountability, there's an increase in corruption, but there's also an increase in division and polarization, which also leads to mental health. But is there anything else there you want to say before we move on to the other side?
Yeah, as we move on, I just want to call forward that being a trusted source of news and information requires constant innovation. It is no longer enough for us just to point to our brands and say that we are the most trusted brands, in part because we have younger generations coming up who don't have a relationship with independent brands or PBS or NPR yet. And so, and we're in a low trust environment. Some of that strategically is being, used against us as we're divided from our own neighbors through a political narrative that may or may not ring true. And so we have to constantly innovate our organizations and public media writ large in order to continue to earn and expand that trust. Sometimes it's through creative use of music to build a bridge to a community that's not going to read the daily news or listen to the daily news, but they will listen to a trusted messenger share resources on the air in between sets of music. So, it's just constant innovation and iteration, and public media has been known for that in our founding days, but sometimes has lost our ability to collectively innovate and consistently drive new ideas forward together.
Joanna, any last comments about the supporting arguments?
No, I agree with what Amanda was saying there. Absolutely.
And share. Okay, sharing screen worked the first time then. Good. So now we're going to switch. That was the supporting arguments. We're going to kind of do the same thing. That we'll have a question set that Alex will bring up here in a second. And again, we're asking, since most of y'all on this call are supportive of public media, we're not asking you which of these you agree with or disagree with. We're more asking you of which of these do you want us to talk about, right? Which of these do you think are the most important for us to kind of better engage, better understand, respond to? Sometimes that response is, trying to show that that's exaggerated and not fair, and some of that response is, yes, maybe we need to change some of our practices, right? So you want to go ahead and put the question up, Alex? Yeah. So again, you're going to be picking kind of your top three here. So if you're not actively looking at it, thus far, the current the third bullet point on the screen is getting the most kind of reaction, followed by the first bullet point. The first bullet point is kind of more of an overall, and I will say part of the history here. I think the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was passed in 1967 during the Johnson administration. PBS and NPR kind of started the next couple years. The conservatives that pushed back on this, part of this was part of Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation. They made clear that every single Republican administration since it was passed has tried to do what was just done, right? They've been unsuccessful. People have rallied, but there has always been kind of a philosophical, pushback on public funding for media, and making the argument that the market should make it. So that first bullet point's more this theoretical principle. The other bullet points are tied. Well, I guess two is probably also that. The other ones might be more, at least the third one, which is getting the most interest, is not so much being against public media, but being against the practice of public media currently, of saying, no, what y'all aren't doing what y'all are supposed to be doing, right? And we saw from the first question, people saw, hey, being a trusted, informed, fact-based source of news is most important to them. We're getting on the pushback, and the arguments made to pass the legislation was they're not a trusted source, right? They're not, they are biased in a sense. So I've got some information. We'll dig into that. But first, I'll give a chance for Amanda and Joanna if there's something that you want to kind of jump on here. And I also want to make clear that there is this distinction. A lot of the bias charges are for national, for the PBS shows, the NPR shows, but likely much less for the local shows. That often are not that political either, right? But I'll give y'all a chance. Maybe start with Joanna if there's something reacting to this list that you want to kind of mention first before I do a little bit of a deeper dive into the bias kind of issue that is getting the most votes.
Sure, you bet. Thanks, Martín. It's interesting, Wyoming, and I don't think it's lost on anyone and anyone on this call that Wyoming is the most conservative state in the entire United States of America. I mean, there's no getting around that. And so I was joking earlier and talking with folks about how I think the determination for who is the president is determined even before the polls close in some instances in Wyoming. So however, that doesn't represent our entire audience. And so I often try and remind people that this isn't about Wyoming Republican media. This isn't Wyoming Democrat media. This is Wyoming public media. And so it's very, very important for us to listen. And I think that is the one thing that all of us within public media, not just on the local station level, but on a national level, it is very, very important for us to listen. And if we hear of issues or concerns when it comes to what we're providing in our reporting and in the content that we have, is listening. And, I've received a lot of phone calls and a lot of input from audience members for many years since I've been at Wyoming PBS about concerns over bias. And it is my job in this position because we are representing the people of Wyoming. We answer to the people of Wyoming. And so I have to listen to all opinions involved. And I think this is something that we continue to try and work on as a system. And I think it is very important for those of us like doing these kinds of webinars and partnering with other stations to listen and pay attention. The loss of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was existential. And that was a big change in our public media system. 60 years was changed because of that decision. And so we must look internally. We must look within our own networks, within the system, to answer the questions that you are all posing to us tonight. What are we doing? How can we make the changes necessary so that maybe those kinds of things in the future might not happen to the public media system? It is very challenging. It's very difficult, but that's the reality of the situation. So listening more, I think, is one of the things that Wyoming PBS is trying to do a better job of, and I'm hoping that the entire system of public media can do as well.
Joanna, I'm sorry to interrupt, Martín. I just wanted to let you know there have been a couple questions about the op-ed that you wrote, which I think is consistent with what you were just saying. I don't know if you'd like to expand any more or tie the two together or address that in any way.
You bet, yes. And I authored an op-ed, gosh, I think it was right after the rescission vote was passed. And it's challenging. This is a challenging time. I think it's also very challenging for people to understand that Wyoming PBS is an independent television network. It is an independent television station. And we have been watching for many years just the commentary coming through to us and the overall just general atmosphere and feeling of we need to be less focused on bias, well, less focused on a more left-leaning narrative and more focused on being more center. Well, what exactly does that mean? The 90% of what we broadcast, it has nothing to do with politics. And that's the really challenging part. We have a very small amount in our broadcast that has to do with news and would be perceived as biased. However, we've lost, I think, a significant amount of audience members. And this doesn't happen overnight. This is something that has happened over many, many years of perceived bias. And whether I feel it's in the content or not, at this point doesn't necessarily matter. It's whether or not people and within our system, not within our system, sorry, our audience members feel that it's there. And I think what happened with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was a huge alarm. I think it was a kind of a shot over the bow of saying, we really are frustrated because this is built up over years and years and years of concerns that I will only speak for Wyoming PBS. I can't speak for Rocky Mountain PBS. That's why Amanda's here. But I can speak for Wyoming PBS in terms of the concerns that I have heard for years from our members. And it's hard to calculate politics within the public media system. But I think that the simple fact that we lost the Corporation for Public Broadcasting because of a perception of bias is pretty telling. And I think that was one of the reasons why I authored that op-ed, because we've never seen anything like that. And I feel for many, many years we've been dealing with this concern. We go to Washington, D.C. every year and we talk with our representation, and this has been a concern for many, many years. So that is one of the reasons why I authored that. And I feel very passionately we need to be listening more.
Yeah, and just to build on what Joanna is saying, I think that it's important to note that independent public media organizations pay a percentage of our annual budget to national organizations to be members. Whether that's PBS or whether that's an organization called APTS, which is our lobbying arm, or it's NPR. We are members of national organizations, and as members, we want and need and expect to have a voice on your behalf in what public media looks like overall. And so over time, I think there is an absence of really hearing each other in those conversations sometimes, and really working together to unlock the voices of Americans across the country, not just where these really big national programs are produced in DC or in Boston or in San Francisco. And so I think it's a common feeling, especially in the breadbasket or in middle America, that your voices and therefore our voices sometimes aren't heard enough or taken into consideration as we are working together to make sure we're providing all public media audiences with a full scope and view of what it's like to live here in different parts of our country. And when we don't do that well, we miss really big things as a country. And so we don't see them coming, or we don't understand why they happened. And so a lot of how we understand each other must go back to listening and finding and restructuring public media to really be a model that can execute on what we're hearing across the country. Right now, we're really mostly designed to execute in a certain consolidated areas around our country. And so when we talk about bias, like Martín said, a lot of it is really focused around the national news conversation. sometimes to the expense of our local news, where audiences don't know it's here or don't watch it. But we have a daily digital newsroom that's really focused on the 30 to 40% of Coloradans who don't even engage in voting. They don't believe or trust in the system anymore. And so they turn away from it altogether, and they turn away from politics altogether because it feels like such an irrelevant conversation to them. And that is where our concern is, and our mandate is to strengthen the civic fabric, is to recognize just how many people don't even believe there's a place for them, that their voice doesn't matter, it doesn't count. And that is a threat to our democracy as well.
Right. So I do want to talk a little bit about bias, since that was clearly going in kind of the biggest issue. A lot of my work as a communication professor, trying to bring people together and part of this kind of bridging world and dialogue deliberation world, I research a lot about bias and kind of how it works. So I want to make some basic comments here. Then I'm going to show some resources online. I'll provide links to this once I turn it back to Joanna and Amanda. To try to get into that question of, is public media bias, particularly is PBS bias? Again, most of this research will be at the national level. But I want to start by saying that, I teach a class that try to teach students how do you find good information and what sources should you use. 10, 15 years ago, we'd say you need to use unbiased sources. We don't use that language anymore, right? There's a recognition that there's always going to be bias. So it's not whether you're biased or not biased. It's bias is inherent and it's unavoidable. It's basically part of the human condition. One of the resources I'll pop on the chat as well. Right now, there's a chart with 180 cognitive biases that have been labeled and studied. And our brain is wired, unfortunately, that we are inherently biased. So we see such a negative term around bias. But bias can sometimes be purposeful and kind of explicit and clear. Bias can be hidden and manipulative, which is the problematic. Bias is often unconscious. You don't even realize you're being biased. It can often be exaggerated. It can be weaponized. And we know for sure from the research that we tend to overemphasize other people's biases and be blind to our own, right? One way I talk about this is we're catty corner thinkers. We're really good at all the reasons that we're right and they're wrong, right? And that's what fuels a lot of polarization, because the other side does the opposite and we're just not on the same plane in a way. But also, as I've really been digging into this, we focus so much on political bias, like left versus right, as the primary way of talking about bias. And it is an important way, but it is only one way, right? You can be biased towards the truth and against misinformation. And I think most people would agree we should be biased, and certainly, traditional journalism, professional journalism focuses on that. We should be biased, especially public media, on democracy, right? On human rights and on free speech, and then lots of voices and rule of law, right? We should be biased towards serving the watchdog role. And keeping the powerful accountable. And then going back to the fragmentation question, with the attention economy and so much kind of competing in the internet and everything like that, clearly local newsrooms have to be biased towards particular audiences, right? They have to be biased to, and often more and more, that's biased towards a particular political perspective, telling people what they want to hear. But you might need to be biased towards funders or subscribers or advertisers. And then sometimes we might be biased towards balance, but we can overdo that. We can be so focused on balance that we miss important distinctions, and we fall into both sidesism, and we fall into false equivalency, right? So when we talk about bias, we need to kind of have a little bit more complexity to bias, in lots of different ways. And some of this research that I'll show now will kind of get into some of that. And a lot of this research supports that concerns that there is bias from PBS, right? So I'm going to show you a couple different websites. I'll post links once I stop talking if you're interested in digging this in. This is one website called All Sides, which tries to do a really good job of evaluating lots of different media sources. You can also go in there and search for an issue that you care about, and it will give you 5 sources, right? A center source, a far left, a far right, and a lean left and right. So they talk a little bit, and you can see the same thing. Everyone's biased, and that's okay, right? So it's not whether you're biased or not, it's how biased you are and how explicit or open you are about that bias. You can also look at specific pages, right? And they have a whole process. You can go to their website to see kind of how they do this. But you see, at least for PBS NewsHour here, that it does have it leaning left, and they have a whole bunch of information about how they kind of come up with that research, right? Though I will say All Sides just does the left versus right, right? So one of my favorite sources is Fontes Media. Some of y'all probably seen this. They try to evaluate, they do websites, they do television, they do podcasts in lots of different ways. It gets really busy, both on that left to right on the top, like All Sides, but then the vertical axis is quality, right? So you see towards the top is they're basically fact reporting or fact dense. Then it kind of gets a mix of fact and analysis, and then a little bit more analysis. Then it starts getting to opinion. It might be opinion, but fair opinion. And then on the bottom, they start getting into their overly selective or manipulative. And towards the bottom, it's making up information or being kind of problematic, right? So this webpage, really interesting webpage to go in there. I'll give the link. They have like a little 5-minute video. We don't have time to show tonight of how they come up with this. They have panels that look at this, but then you can look at individual organizations. So buried in here, you can't really see it, is PBS. PBS NewsHour is a little bit there. But if you search just for PBS, the way they do this ranking is every single one of these dots is a separate story that was evaluated by their panel. And they have a diverse panel that looks at all these things and ranks it. The video kind of explains it, right? So you see for a lot of stories, it's kind of exactly right in the middle. But then most of the stories they saw skew left, a couple of them a little bit further. And you see none kind of, I guess that one's barely on the right side there, right? So this is content analysis of the shows that show at least national PBS tends to, yes, a little bit on the left side, but also tends to be very high on this ranking, right? So if you're not looking at political bias, but you're looking at bias towards facts, if you're looking at in that kind of way, right, it's getting a pretty high score. It's up here in the 40s or so. And if you go back to all the other ones, right, that you have PBS is one of the more trusted. And there's other research out there when asking people of trust, right? The last thing I want to show is Pew Research, which I think is a pretty well-known and kind of respected survey organization. They do a lot of good surveys on lots of different issues. They just recently, this is before the vote, I think this was in March of this year, did some national polling on, do you support NPR and PBS kind of together? And you see here, there is more support to continue the funding than remove, but that's a pretty big split left to right. Right. So this is more perception. This is asking people if you think. So the first was content analysis. This is more survey. Do you think they're biased? So you kind of see the same thing, that there is a pretty big distinction between people that self-identify as leaning Republican or Democrat and how they respond to where, how many are watching or getting their news from it, and how many that they see it as a trusted source. So I just wanted to share some of those things as some data to kind of give us some information about those questions of bias. So I'll open it up to if y'all want to respond to that a little bit, maybe just a few minutes here, and then we do need to move on to kind of what's your plans moving forward, and here and have some time for some questions as well.
I think it's that I really love the analysis on quality. I think it's really important that, and I'm proud to see that quality is so high for PBS and for public media, but mainly for PBS's content. I know that you didn't specifically, Martín, go into the PBS NewsHour, but I appreciate you showing the PBS side. But I think that does show a little bit about those concerns in terms of where that scatter chart might need to be to truly represent the country. And maybe you can expand even more on that, because you're the expert on bias, and I'm not even in that realm with you, but I think that's why you're here, to help us. But I think to better understand where we would love to see public media, or at least PBS, would be to have that scatter more evenly, or maybe have some more of those dots on the other side of that axis. And I think that right there is a good explanation, and I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. To the concerns that we have in terms of national PBS. And when I say national PBS, I truly do mean national PBS's content that is distributed to us. I would love to see that scatter chart more focused, and I think that more focused on both sides. And I think that does come from that listening that I have been trying to really emphasize. It's important for all of us to listen to one another. And again, public media has a unique opportunity to provide that space for the listening and provide that space for that mutual respect of one another. We all have our opinions. We all have our biases. You know, I like Pepsi better than Coke, but I think, but I do think that there's a missing element of, you know, we call them keyboard warriors. We call them, you know, we have that element of we can just say as much as we want, but are we listening? Are we truly listening to one another and trying to reflect what we're hearing? That's the key.
Yeah, and there were some questions brought forward about how do we create a shared set of facts? And I think that protecting our ability to have mass media as we traditionally know it is really, really important. It's that media source that enough people go to for a spectrum of information and perspectives, that we aren't just splintering off into smaller subsets of communities. And that is where the shared set of facts start to get harder to protect and preserve. And so I think public media's role in creating a public square that's big enough to accommodate a spectrum of, you know, healthy political debate. I certainly am not one to say we need to or should we be encompassing the entirety of our toxic national politics debate, you know, spectrum. But there is an acceptable range of productive discourse and debate, and our tent needs to be big enough to encompass all of it, and that needs to be ultimately reflected in these scattershot plots and in your experience of our content. And I think, like Martín said, we do a better job than most, but because we're public media, we hold ourselves to an increasingly higher standard. And so we need and want to keep doing better and better to protect the diversity of our audience, so that we don't further, slide into a quadrant on that scattershot plot that narrowcasts in a way that is against our intent.
Hey, can I hop in for just a second? Because I think this is relevant as we're moving into the what's next. So one of the questions that came across is, did the local PBS stations start to feel burdened over the last decade or so by the national political positioning of cpbpbs.org? Is there a way in time to turn lemons into lemonade and flourish without the potential negative, at least to some portion of the population, umbrella of the CPB? In other words, could the rescission prove to be a good thing in the long term for individual PBS stations?
Boy, Amanda, do you want to take a stab at that one first, and then I can follow up?
I can if you'd like. Yeah, I mean, look, I'll say that certainly I don't want to speak for Joe, but it's our job to turn challenges into opportunities, and public media is founded upon a fundamental challenge of reaching and serving people who did not feel served by commercial media. That's why we exist to begin with. So it's in our DNA to find those paths of opportunity, to find ways to bring people together across seeming divides, and to protect your access to high quality, free information and lifelong learning in a way that supports generational upward mobility. That's why we're here. That's why we exist. And that's why I imagine many of you support us. So we're going to find a way, and we're going to continue to do that. I don't know about the resentment part of that question. I will say there are natural tensions over the course of any relationship as you're working to balance the power dynamics and listen to each other and find ways to do really difficult things together in a way that unlocks the real potential. And I'm excited because I think we still have potential, as much potential as we've realized together in public media. I feel like there is so much more potential to unlock together alongside Americans in all parts of our country. And public media is frankly the only institution that's going to be able to do it. And so I think we're up for the task with your support. And I know the need is growing greater by the day. And so we're ready. We're ready to step into that.
I think that was a great answer, Amanda. And I think Yes, let's make lemonade from this moment. And that's why the stations, the station leaders throughout this whole process have been coming together. We have been having conversations about what does this mean? Primarily, what does this mean for our audience members? What does this mean for our communities? How do we come above this? And most of all, listen and learn from this, because PBS is a content distributor. What they do is they provide us with content. That is what PBS does. And so it is our job as television networks to then decide whether or not what PBS is providing really does represent the diversity that is within our states. That's our job. And I think that is one of my most treasured jobs as CEO of Wyoming PBS, is doing our very best to make sure that we're answering to the people of Wyoming. And so this opportunity absolutely gives us some insight into how can we improve. Wyoming PBS is going to be okay. There are things that we're going to need to do, and we'll talk about that. I know Martin's probably going, come on, Jill, let's go. But I think, we're going to be okay. But I think the one thing that we can provide in a world right now that doesn't trust, that is divisive, that it is right or wrong, it is black or white, nothing's gray, nothing's nuanced anymore. Let's get to know each other as people first. And then maybe we learn the politics after, because it's not as important as who we are as individuals. That's the fabric of our society. What are public television stations doing to help us learn each other as people first? There's the big portion of who we are as individuals. We have a lot of things in common. Public media stands here to provide that. We have documentaries on Trona miners, on generations of Trona miners. We have documentaries on the history of mountain climbing and guided mountain climbing coming from Wyoming. We have this mental health series. I mean, all of these things kind of represent different facets of who Wyoming is. So this conversation has made our team talk even more in depth. Guys, we need more local programming, more public affairs, more talking to and listening to, more importantly, our audience members. I think it actually could be a beneficial thing it has to be. We have to look at it in that way. We have to grow from this. That's how we learn.
And I would just add, this connects with the earlier argument about focusing more on local news versus national news. Done a lot of research on polarization and what's the root cause of polarization. And it's clear from that I argue often, I did this a lot with the Undivided kind of sessions last summer when we went around the state running that documentary and discussions, that I think polarization is our number one issue, because when we're polarized at this level, we can't really function, right? We can't have conversations. And, as people have said, facts don't work, right? When we're polarized, we just the facts on our side we accept, and the other side we kind of dismiss. But I also believe that polarization is very exaggerated. It's not real. Right? There's lots of research that shows this. Great research from an organization called More in Common that does these perception gap research and asking people, and they show that the more educated you are and the more involved in politics, the wronger you are about the other side. Right. So the antidote to that is real people talking to each other, right? Not just getting our feeds from from each of our sides, but how do we get a chance for people to come together and talk to each other? And often when people talk to each other in a good situation, right? That's the work that we do, is how do we set this up? How do we use our knowledge of social psychology and brain science to help people have these conversations? Because our brains are not wired to have these conversations on our own too much. And certainly that's something I'm excited about public media, both in Colorado and Wyoming, kind of seeing as something that you feel you need to kind of do moving forward right? So we've already, Amber's question kind of set us up to start talking about that next bullet point on the agenda, which is the last one, and then we'll spend some more time kind of answering questions here about what's next for you, right? And part of what I heard from the survey, there was this kind of mix of like, okay, so how are you going to do without the public funding? And there's quite a few people of like, how do we get back the public funding, right? So I'm kind of curious your reaction to that. Where are you right now moving forward? What's this new reality? Lots of people concerned. Are you going to be able to survive and so forth? So I'm kind of curious your reactions and what are you doing moving forward for this? And also, some of the stations that y'all are working with that are more local.
Yeah, so we did feel like it was prudent, given what we were seeing play out at the national scale, to protect our editorial independence. And we perceived a lot of different ways that threat could come, federal defunding being one of them, or federal interference being another. And so we did proactively plan over 6 months to skinny down our budget and prepare for the moment when Congress rescinded the funding. Now we are in a place where we have designed a future where we can expand local content through local news and trusted information, gathering people together to bridge seeming divides through in-person events and conversations like this, and celebrating culture and heritage through our radio stations, and building trust in information brokers like our hosts on air. So we've got a strategy to expand trust through an expansion of local content, and invest in some technological infrastructure that will really help us better serve the 3 million Coloradans a month who are engaging in our content, and the 1 million Coloradans who are in active relationship with us. They've given us contact information, they're subscribing to newsletters, and in order to really deliver on relationship building and friendship building, we need better technology to do that. And so we are in a Catalyst campaign raising $9.7 million alongside our operating budget. And we have just received an outpouring of support from the community. And we are continuing to reach out to have conversations. So we have a plan for the future that includes stepping in to support the ecosystem as much as we can, so that all of Colorado public media can find a path to be stronger through this challenge.
And I would say, Martín, for Wyoming PBS, really for us, it's leaning in. And did you just hear what Amanda said? I mean, learning, learning from our leaders throughout the system. We have so many amazing leaders throughout the system, and I am actively listening to what they're doing, because that's, to me, that's one of the opportunities that Wyoming PBS has, is leaning in and listening to some of the other really successful leaders in our industry right now. For Wyoming PBS, we will be looking more into how do we get more into our communities. We're really excited. We just brought on a new member of our team here that we'll be announcing soon, and that member is a content director. And so we're actively talking about how can we be out in our communities more, and helping communities know that they can come to us and talk with us more about what do you want from Wyoming PBS. It's that one-on-one, like you're saying, Martín. It's that face-to-face. It's that having that conversation of trust and respect. Let's talk about what you would like to see more on Wyoming PBS, and engaging in possible projects like Above the Noise for the state of Wyoming. I think that would be very helpful. We're all very unique. We all, just because I said earlier that we are a primarily conservative state, that does not represent our entire state. And that's very important for us to remember in Wyoming. And it's important for us to remember at our mission at Wyoming PBS. We also are really excited to announce some new technology that we're going to be rolling out for emergency alerts. The people of Wyoming will soon be able to register for emergency alerts by county, and all emergency alerts run through us. And so you can text a number and sign up for your county, and you'll get all emergency alerts, Ashanti, Amber alerts, weather alerts, all right there on your phone. So we have fires, flooding, all kinds of issues in Wyoming. We want to make sure we're keeping Wyomingites safe. We do have an amazing matching opportunity from the Hughes Charitable Foundation that was just provided to us for an establishment of an endowment. We're also working closely with our foundation to create more opportunities for support for Wyoming PBS and the storytelling and preservation that we do. Lots of interesting things have come. So just as we were talking about lemonade, we've gotten a lot of interesting phone calls and outreach from organizations, both private and public, that have offered a bit of an opportunity to grow and learn from what's happened with CPB. So I'm really excited for the future, but mainly I'm excited for the audience members of Wyoming to see more of their stories and their content shared to everyone.
So I'm going to jump in with that, because we have a couple of questions that are relevant to actually what you just addressed, Joanna. There's a person in Wyoming who has had some questions about meeting people who are not conservative, where they are. So I'll just take this one question from this viewer. I would wonder what percentage of the people who vote in Wyoming would be PBS supporters. Wyoming is a very red state and supports Trump, and so they would support the rescission. But the subset of Wyoming that supports PBS financially may not be the typical Wyoming voter. So being responsive to the Wyoming public may actually be antithetical to unbiased reporting. So that wasn't exactly a question, but there have been, well, I guess that the question was, I wonder what percentage of the people who vote in Wyoming would be PBS supporters. I don't know if you know that. And if you just want to speak to people who don't represent the conservative Wyomingian.
No, you're muted.
Sorry. Unfortunately, I don't have those metrics. I don't have that data, Amber. I wish I did. That would be very interesting to know. I've always shared with everyone that public media is funded by everyone. It's truly funded by everyone. And so, again, 90% of what we are providing through our broadcast with PBS is beautiful content about nature and about the arts. It's about drama. It's about moving hearts and minds. As Amanda, I think, spoke to earlier, I would also argue that Wyoming wants that content, both conservative and liberal. They want that content that represents worldwide perspectives. I think what is important for us at Wyoming PBS is that we continue to provide as much balance with the content that we are producing as possible. For example, some of the content that we choose to broadcast isn't always popular with either side. I get phone calls for the content that we choose to put on, and I feel like when I'm getting those phone calls, I'm doing my job. If I put something on the air that conservatives will call and say, gosh, why did you do that on water rights? Why? That's not okay. Joanna, you know better than that. No, maybe you should listen. Maybe you should watch and you should listen, because this is an important topic for all of Wyoming. So I encourage our audience members to engage in what we're sharing, because you're not going to agree with everything that we put on there, but that's okay. That's okay. Is what we're trying to produce and what we're trying to share with everyone making you think? Are you listening to it? Because I have to listen to all of you. And I have to do my very best to represent all of you. And that is a beautiful part of my job. And I actually really admire that job. And I love that part of my job. But I think if we ever get into the situation where we're not listening, or we choose not to listen to an opinion that we may disagree with, that's when we're in trouble. And I think that's when we start to lose trust at a pretty massive level. So I don't know if that answered that, Amber. I hope it did. But yeah, that's kind of where
I want to jump in to go ahead. Alex put up the last set of questions. So they've been talking about their path forward. We want to kind of learn from the wisdom in the room. So we got 4 open-ended questions here. We're just going to collect this and we'll have it for later. But if you have advice for Amanda or Joanna about what you think they should be doing kind of moving forward, based on this conversation or based on what you came in with. But then we're also going to ask, what are you willing to do? Lots of people on the survey said, hey, what can we do, right? How can we help? So I want y'all to speak to that briefly. I'm going to share my screen, and this is something that Amanda kind of emailed me earlier about this, of just some of the things that you can do. But for those that are wanting to help, what else would you want to kind of say briefly? And we'd love to hear which of these speak to you in the audience, or what other ideas you have that you want to step up to help. And again, these polls will be open-ended, so we're not waiting for the responses here. So I don't know if either of y'all have a quick pitch. We got about 5 minutes left. So, and Amber, I don't know if there's other questions you've got locked and loaded, ready to go that we can kind of jump to as well.
I think I'll let Amanda and Joanna just wrap, and then I just have one small thing to say at the end.
Yeah, I do want to take this opportunity to recognize that Rocky Mountain Public Media has almost 800 volunteers across the state who are supporting us in a lot of different ways. Something that Amber is leading and that we're really excited about is a program called Ambassador 64. And this is our effort to build an ongoing network of community listening and content design. And so if you're interested in learning more about this, we would love to hear from you. Please put it into the form. But our aim is to have trusted community brokers in as many counties across the state as possible, helping as a part of this check and balance, both helping hold us accountable, but also helping broker and build trust in communities across the state and connect people to each other. So thank you to any volunteers who are on the phone, and we look forward to having that conversation if you're interested in learning more.
I just really want to thank those who actually tuned in tonight to listen to this. These are tough conversations. I know we have a few more. We're very honored and humbled, of course, as I mentioned earlier, to be a part of it. And I just think really the most important piece is that we're doing our very best to listen to Wyoming and lean into Wyoming as Wyoming PBS. That is our focus. That is our mission. Getting out more. I think we were just talking in a meeting just recently. We've been at 8 to 10 events this year, which for Wyoming, I think is a record breaking opportunity for us. I mean, this is a big state and we're located in one place. And so our team does a lot of work and a lot of preparation to take a screening event somewhere else. And we have had incredible turnout at a lot of those events telling Wyoming stories. And so that's one of my most favorite parts of what we do is when we're in that room and we've told a Wyomingite story, no matter what it has to do with their history, arts, and culture, and them walking up to me and saying, thank you so much. No one else would have told that story. So we look forward to that and supporting Wyoming PBS. We are so fortunate to have the Wyoming PBS Foundation out there working very hard to support us. And wow, how many volunteers? My goodness, that's maybe a next big goal of ours is to create a volunteer network across Wyoming, because I think that could be incredibly valuable. Thank you all for being a part of this and for listening. We need to do that more often to one another and learn from each other. Thank you.
So I'll just be very brief. I'm just going to put a link in the chat, just to my website and some of the writings I've made about this. One of those, I do have something going back to the bias thing where I talk about the work that I try to do. I use the term principled impartiality, that I'm impartial, but I'm committed to democracy and I'm committed to good information. And those are in tension often. That's especially in our current environment, in this low trust environment. Doing the work to try to kind of find the balance between those things is very difficult. And that's something that we'll dig in a little bit more in future conversations, I'm sure. Right.
Thanks, Martín. So we have 1 minute left, and I just wanted to let y'all know this is one of at least 3-part series. So this is how we're kicking it off with our Above the Noise program at Rocky Mountain Public Media. We do have another session scheduled for September 23rd, in which we will bring in some journalists from newsrooms across Colorado and the CEO of the Trust Project to talk about how journalists and newsrooms are building or rebuilding trust and answer questions when that doesn't happen. So we'd love to see you there. Keep us in touch with you, and please feel free to reach out to us at civicengagement@rmpbs.org if you have any questions or follow-up comments that you'd like to share. Everything that we weren't able to get to tonight, we will have that help inform our next sessions as we go forward. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and thanks to the panelists.
Thank you all so much. Thank you,
Yeah.
Joe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks, everyone.